In the poorest regions of space stations, life revolves around a complex web of power dynamics shaped by various players, each with their own motivations, resources, and influence. These participants are diverse, ranging from those who exploit the desperate to those who navigate the chaos for survival or opportunity. Understanding who they are provides a glimpse into the intricate mechanisms that govern these shadowy depths. The first and most pervasive influence comes from criminal organizations. These entities thrive where the Imperium's reach falters, filling the void with their own brands of order and control. Operating as sprawling networks of gangs, cartels, and syndicates, they establish territories and enforce their rules with unrelenting authority. Their ranks are filled with hardened enforcers, cunning leaders, and desperate recruits, all bound together by necessity or greed. These groups manage everything from illicit trade and smuggling to extortion and protection rackets, ensuring that their grip on the underdecks remains firm. Religious sects also play a prominent role, although their doctrines often diverge sharply from the sanctioned faith of the ecclesiarchy. In the darkest corners of the stations, heretical cults and forbidden beliefs take root, offering hope or power to those willing to embrace them. Some preach salvation through devotion to obscure deities, while others promise liberation from the Imperium's oppression. Whether their followers are driven by faith, desperation, or manipulation, these sects wield significant influence, shaping the actions and lives of many in these regions. Another dominant force is the collection of merchant clans and black market traders who ensure the flow of goods in a place where scarcity defines existence. Operating outside the purview of sanctioned trade, these individuals provide essential items, stolen goods, or rare commodities to those who can afford their inflated prices. These traders wield considerable power, as their ability to supply food, water, tools, or even weapons makes them indispensable to the population. Their loyalty is often fluid, dictated by profit rather than principle. Technological scavengers and tech syndicates add another layer to this environment. These groups specialize in harvesting, repairing, or repurposing discarded or damaged machinery, much of which is deemed obsolete by the Imperium. Their knowledge of ancient technologies or their ability to forge rudimentary replacements grants them a unique edge. They are both revered and feared for their skills, as their creations can either uplift communities or lead to catastrophic failures. Among the many faces of power, political exiles and rogue officials from the upper levels of the station often seek to carve out their own domains within the underdecks. Stripped of their previous status but unwilling to relinquish their ambitions, they leverage whatever remains of their influence to establish themselves as rulers of small fiefdoms. These figures often possess knowledge of bureaucratic systems, allowing them to manipulate the flow of resources or secure alliances with other key players. Another significant presence is that of mercenary bands. These groups are drawn to the poorest regions by the promise of payment, resources, or recruitment opportunities. Hired by factions to enforce control, resolve disputes, or eliminate rivals, they are a force to be reckoned with. Their loyalty is to their contracts, and their actions are dictated by the highest bidder, often resulting in short-lived but devastating campaigns of violence. Looming in the background are the remnants of the Adeptus Mechanicus. While most of their kind reside in the lofty sanctums of technology, some lesser sects or rogue elements find themselves drawn to the depths of space stations. Their presence is driven by a desire to collect forgotten relics, study unique phenomena, or impose their own order in places where traditional laws fail. Their motives are rarely clear, and their methods often clash with the interests of others, leading to uneasy alliances or open conflict. Finally, the station's impoverished residents themselves cannot be overlooked. This vast, faceless mass constitutes the lifeblood of the underdecks, enduring the crushing weight of poverty while navigating the treacherous currents of competing powers. They are not a unified force, but a tapestry of struggling individuals, families, and small communities. Their actions, however small, can sway the balance of power, whether by offering support to a faction resisting oppression or igniting revolts. Each of these players shapes the unforgiving world of the underdecks in their own way, creating an environment defined by shifting alliances, power struggles, and the ever-present fight for survival. Together, they form the chaotic and often brutal fabric of life in the poorest regions of space stations. The vast expanse of the Warhammer 40k universe is a labyrinth of extremes. At its heart, the Imperium of Man towers as an unfathomable colossus, its myriad worlds and celestial constructs embodying both the pinnacle and the abyss of human achievement. Within its glittering spires of power, decisions are made that shape the fate of trillions. Yet, far below these golden monuments lies a world few acknowledge and fewer still dare to tread, a shadowy underbelly of poverty, desperation, and survival. This is the life of the poorest regions of space stations, where the light of the Emperor shines dimly, if at all. Orbiting countless worlds, the Imperium's space stations serve many purposes. Some are mighty battle platforms, bristling with weapons and shielding entire sectors. Others are bastions of trade, hubs where merchants and rogue traders ply their wares. But there are those that serve humbler, grittier functions, facilitating mining operations, housing sprawling manufactorums, or merely offering refuge to countless souls with no place to call home. These stations are not monoliths of order and prosperity. Instead, they are divided realms, starkly separated by levels, corridors, and the ever-present lines of class. Above are the affluent, the officers, the priests, and the functionaries of the Imperium. Below, in the deepest, most forgotten sections, exist the impoverished masses, scraping by in conditions so dire they defy comprehension. Here, survival is a constant battle. Resources are scarce, law is distant, and hope is a commodity fewer and fewer can afford. These regions, often called the underdecks, serve as the crucible for countless stories of despair and resilience. The underdecks are where industry churns relentlessly, where waste from above trickles down, and where humanity's forgotten huddle in their millions. Within these dark, labyrinthine corridors, survival takes on a primal edge, and control is seldom in the hands of the noble or the virtuous. Who then controls these forsaken depths? The answer is neither simple nor static. Power in the poorest sectors of space stations is an ever-shifting balance, claimed by those with the cunning, strength, or sheer ruthlessness to assert their dominance. It is not the appointed governors or the lofty Imperium itself that holds sway here, but a complex and volatile ecosystem of competing forces. This is a world shaped by scarcity and conflict, where gangs rise and fall in the blink of an eye, where rogue psychers and heretical cults whisper blasphemies to desperate ears, and where the Xenos and mutants dwell in the margins of human misery. It is a realm where the rule of law is replaced by the rule of power, and morality is bent to the breaking point by the harsh necessities of existence. Yet, even in this darkness, strange alliances are formed, traditions emerge, and cultures develop, warped echoes of the Imperium above. The story of who controls life in these poorest regions is one of competing ideologies, fractured alliances, and shadowy figures. It is a story that illuminates not just the grim reality of life at the edges of human civilization, but also the resilience and resourcefulness that can emerge in even the direst circumstances. This tale is not merely about those who impose control, but also those who resist it, those who endure, and those who dare to dream of something more in a world that has offered them nothing. As we descend into this underworld, the question remains. In a universe ruled by chaos and order, faith and heresy, who truly holds power in the depths of these forgotten realms? The answers, as we shall uncover, are as complex and multifaceted as the stations themselves, veiled in a darkness that stretches beyond the physical shadows of their labyrinthine corridors. The conditions in the poorest regions of space stations did not emerge overnight. They are the cumulative result of centuries of neglect, exploitation, and systemic inequality within the Imperium of Man. Space stations, though marvels of engineering, were never designed with the well-being of their lower inhabitants in mind. These massive constructs were initially created to serve strategic purposes, to support military campaigns, facilitate trade, or act as hubs for industrial production. However, over time, their design and management evolved to prioritize efficiency, output, and control, often at the expense of those living in their lower levels. The roots of the problem lie in the Imperium's obsession with centralization and its insatiable hunger for resources. The Imperium's bureaucracy, vast and unwieldy, focuses almost entirely on maintaining its war machine and keeping the galaxy-spanning empire intact. This means that space stations, particularly those far from Terra, are rarely provided with sufficient resources or attention. Instead, their administrators are tasked with extracting as much value as possible from the station, regardless of the human cost. This relentless demand for production often leads to the exploitation of the poorest populations, who are forced to work in hazardous environments or endure squalid conditions to keep the station operational. Another contributing factor is the inherent stratification of imperial society. The Imperium thrives on a rigid hierarchy, with power and privilege concentrated in the hands of a few, while the majority are relegated to lives of servitude or obscurity. On space stations, this manifests in the form of stark divisions between the upper levels, where the elite reside, and the lower levels, where the destitute masses struggle to survive. The poorest regions are often physically separated from the rest of the station, relegated to the most dangerous or degraded areas, where basic necessities such as clean water, breathable air, and adequate shelter are luxuries rather than guarantees. The constant influx of displaced populations has also exacerbated the situation. Many of the Imperium's planets are plagued by war, famine, and environmental collapse, leading countless refugees to seek shelter aboard space stations. However, these stations are rarely equipped to accommodate such numbers, forcing new arrivals to settle in overcrowded and unsafe areas. This unchecked growth strains already limited resources, creating a breeding ground for disease, violence, and social unrest. The decay of infrastructure in these regions further compounds the issue. Space stations are ancient constructs, with many predating the age of Imperium itself. While the upper levels are meticulously maintained to reflect the Imperium's grandeur, the lower levels are left to rot. Critical systems such as ventilation, power, and waste management often break down, leaving inhabitants to fend for themselves in increasingly uninhabitable conditions. Attempts at repair are sporadic and superficial, driven more by the need to prevent total collapse than by any concern for the well-being of the population. The influence of external threats has also played a significant role in shaping life in these regions. Raiders, pirates, and other hostile forces frequently target space stations, seeing them as vulnerable repositories of wealth and resources. While the upper levels are fortified and defended, the lower levels are often left exposed, forcing their inhabitants to deal with the fallout of these attacks. Over time, this has fostered a culture of distrust and self-reliance, as the poorest populations learn to survive without any expectation of assistance from the Imperium. Economic factors are another critical piece of the puzzle. The Imperium's economic model is one of relentless extraction, with little regard for sustainability or fairness. The poorest regions of space stations often serve as hubs for industries deemed too dangerous or unclean for more privileged areas, such as toxic waste processing, hazardous manufacturing, or illegal trade. These industries, while providing some form of livelihood, come with immense risks and often contribute to the degradation of the environment and the health of the population. Finally, the pervasive presence of corruption and incompetence among the Imperium's administrators cannot be overlooked. Many of those tasked with managing space stations view their positions as opportunities for personal enrichment rather than as responsibilities. Resources meant for maintenance or aid are frequently siphoned off, while decisions are made based on political expediency rather than practical necessity. This widespread mismanagement ensures that the poorest regions remain in a state of perpetual crisis, with no realistic prospect of improvement. In sum, the dire conditions in the poorest regions of space stations are the result of systemic failures on multiple levels. From the inherent inequalities of the Imperium structure to the pressures of war, resource scarcity, and corruption, these factors have converged to create an environment where survival is a constant struggle. This backdrop sets the stage for the complex and often brutal power dynamics that define life in these forgotten depths. The unfolding events within the poorest regions of space stations are a reflection of relentless struggles for survival, power, and fleeting stability. Over time, these events have developed in a pattern that mirrors the broader decay of the Imperium, while remaining deeply rooted in the unique challenges of the underdecks. The progression of power dynamics and social unrest can be seen as a series of interconnected stages, each leaving its mark on the fragile lives of those who inhabit these desolate spaces. The first stage is often one of abandonment, as resources are diverted to maintain the upper levels of the station or redirected to more pressing military needs. The poorest regions are left to fend for themselves. Initially, this neglect creates a vacuum, where established order begins to unravel. Imperial officials, already overstretched or corrupt, gradually withdraw their presence, leaving the underdecks without governance. This period is marked by growing discontent among the inhabitants as basic necessities such as clean air, water, and food become increasingly scarce. The absence of oversight fosters the rise of opportunists eager to exploit the chaos. Following this abandonment, the second stage emerges as factions consolidate their influence. In the absence of official authority, various groups rise to fill the void. Gangs form alliances, religious sects attract desperate followers, and black market traders establish dominance over key resources. This period is characterized by rapid territorial disputes, as these factions compete to control access to essential supplies or key locations such as air recyclers, water purifiers, or docking bays. Violent clashes erupt frequently, with each faction attempting to secure its position through force or cunning. During this consolidation, an unspoken hierarchy begins to take shape. The strongest or most cunning factions carve out larger domains, often exerting control over smaller groups in exchange for protection or resources. At the same time, informal systems of governance emerge, dictated more by necessity than by any semblance of law. While these systems may bring a degree of stability, they are inherently fragile, built on the precarious balance of power between competing factions. The third stage sees the emergence of external pressures. This could come in the form of outside forces, such as rogue traders seeking to exploit the underdecks for profit, or mercenaries hired by distant powers to enforce their interests. These external players disrupt the fragile equilibrium, often backing certain factions to secure their own objectives. Their presence introduces new technologies, weapons, or resources into the equation, further escalating the intensity of conflicts. The influx of outside interference rarely benefits the inhabitants of the poorest regions, as it often serves to intensify existing rivalries and deepen divisions. The fourth stage is defined by periods of upheaval and fragmentation. Over time, alliances between factions begin to crumble, as betrayal and shifting loyalties become commonplace. Leaders are overthrown, territories are reshaped, and entire communities are displaced as violence reaches new heights. This stage represents the peak of instability, where life in the underdecks becomes almost unlivable for its inhabitants. Widespread destruction often follows, as factions resort to increasingly desperate measures to maintain control, even if it means sabotaging vital systems or unleashing catastrophic consequences. From the chaos of fragmentation, the fifth stage emerges: adaptation and survival. As the most volatile factions burn out or collapse under their own weight, a new equilibrium is reached. Those who survive adapt to the harsh conditions, forging smaller, more resilient communities. This stage is marked by an uneasy coexistence, where factions enforce their dominance through fear or mutual necessity, but outright warfare subsides. Informal agreements, often unspoken, dictate the terms of survival, as inhabitants learn to navigate the dangerous web of power and conflict. While these periods of relative calm are short-lived, they provide brief reprieves that allow the population to recover, however marginally. Finally, the cycle begins anew. The underlying factors that perpetuate life in the underdecks, resource scarcity, neglect, and inequality, remain unchanged, ensuring that any semblance of stability is temporary. As new factions rise and old alliances crumble, the pattern repeats, with each iteration bringing new players, tactics, and consequences. Over the course of centuries, these cycles leave an indelible mark on the underdecks, shaping their culture, traditions, and way of life. This progression of events is not linear, nor is it uniform across the countless space stations of the Imperium. Each station, with its own history, population, and conditions, experiences these stages in unique ways. Some see long periods of stability, punctuated by brief but intense conflicts, while others are trapped in a near-constant state of upheaval. Regardless of the specifics, the overarching pattern remains consistent, a grim testament to the relentless forces that govern life in the poorest regions of space stations. Amid the ongoing chaos and shifting power structures within the poorest regions of space stations, a pivotal event unfolds, a critical decision or moment that reshapes the balance of control and the lives of those dwelling in these forgotten depths. This turning point is not a singular instance, but rather a culmination of mounting tensions, driven by the unique pressures of the underdecks and the harsh realities faced by their inhabitants. What makes this moment so decisive is how it disrupts the fragile status quo, creating lasting ripples throughout the labyrinthine corridors of the station. The key event begins with the breakdown of one of the station's most critical systems, a malfunction or sabotage of an air filtration unit servicing a vast section of the lower levels. This failure, while not uncommon in the neglected underdecks, occurs on a scale unprecedented in recent memory. The sudden deprivation of clean air forces tens of thousands of residents to flee their homes, seeking refuge in neighboring sectors already struggling to sustain their own populations. The resulting overcrowding exacerbates existing resource shortages, sparking widespread panic and violent clashes as factions scramble to secure what little remains. The breakdown, however, is not an isolated incident. Evidence begins to surface that the event was not a random accident, but the result of deliberate sabotage orchestrated by a powerful faction vying for dominance. This faction's aim was to force a rival group from its territory, using the chaos to expand its control over key resources and strategic locations. What they failed to anticipate, however, was the scale of the catastrophe they unleashed. The chain reaction of destruction and displacement spirals beyond their control, engulfing vast swaths of the underdecks in conflict and destabilizing alliances that had held for decades. As the situation worsens, another group steps forward with a controversial solution. This emerging faction, known for its technological expertise, proposes the repair and reactivation of a long-abandoned cogitator core buried deep within the station's infrastructure. This ancient machine, a relic of a bygone era, possesses the capability to regulate vital systems and restore stability to the affected regions. However, its activation comes with significant risks. The cogitator core is unstable, and its programming is poorly understood. Furthermore, its control mechanisms could centralize power in the hands of those who operate it, effectively giving them the ability to dictate life and death across the underdecks. The decision to activate the cogitator core becomes the focal point of intense debate among the underdeck's major factions. Some see it as the only viable path to restoring order, while others fear the potential for abuse and the loss of their autonomy. The debate quickly escalates into open conflict, with factions aligning themselves based on their interests and perceived risks. Those who stand to gain from the cogitator's activation push for its immediate implementation, while others sabotage efforts to bring it online, fearing that it will lead to their subjugation. Eventually, the decision to activate the cogitator core is made, not through consensus, but as a desperate gambit by a coalition of factions who seize control of the necessary systems. The activation, while successful, comes at a steep cost. The unstable machinery sparks a series of power surges and mechanical failures throughout the station, resulting in further destruction and loss of life. The Coalition uses its newfound control to impose strict regulations on resource distribution, demanding loyalty and submission from the remaining factions in exchange for access to air, water, and power. The activation of the Cogitator Core fundamentally alters the balance of power in the Underdecks. The coalition that controls it becomes the de facto authority, wielding unprecedented influence over the lives of the station's poorest inhabitants. However, their rule is far from uncontested. Resistance movements begin to form, driven by those who refuse to accept the new order or who were excluded from its benefits. These movements operate in the shadows, sabotaging the coalition's operations and spreading dissent among the population. This moment represents a turning point not just for the immediate crisis, but for the broader dynamics of power within the Underdecks. The activation of the Cogitator Core introduces a new element of centralized control, disrupting the decentralized and often chaotic systems that had previously governed life in these regions. It also reveals the lengths to which factions are willing to go to secure dominance, highlighting the stark divide between survival and power in the poorest regions of space stations. The consequences of this event will continue to shape the lives of the Underdecks inhabitants for generations to come, leaving a legacy of both hope and despair. The immediate impact of the events within the poorest regions of space stations is both localized and far-reaching, creating ripples that extend well beyond the confines of these desolate sectors. These effects manifest in various forms, influencing not only the lives of the inhabitants, but also the wider mechanisms of the Imperium, its allies, and even its adversaries. The consequences are as multifaceted as the regions themselves, with repercussions felt across the socio-economic, political, and military landscapes of the galaxy. One of the most immediate effects is the shift in the socio-political structure of the stations. The consolidation of power by dominant factions or coalitions in the Underdecks often upends the delicate balance that previously governed these regions. This reorganization of authority creates a new layer of informal governance, operating parallel to the Imperium's official hierarchy. While this structure may temporarily stabilize the situation, it often leads to increased tensions between the upper levels and the Underdecks, as the Imperium's appointed officials struggle to assert control over areas now governed by unofficial rulers. These tensions can escalate into full-scale conflicts, forcing the station's leadership to divert resources and attention away from other critical areas. The events in the Underdecks also have significant economic implications. The poorest regions often house key industrial facilities, such as manufactorums, recycling centers, or storage depots, which are essential for the station's operations. When these regions descend into chaos or fall under the control of rogue factions, production slows or halts entirely, disrupting the flow of goods and resources. These disruptions are felt not only on the station, but also across the wider supply chains that rely on its output. Trade routes are affected, military logistics are delayed, and colonies that depend on supplies from the station are left vulnerable. In extreme cases, the instability in the Underdecks can trigger economic crises that ripple through entire sectors, weakening the Imperium's ability to maintain its war efforts. Another consequence is the amplification of inequality and unrest within the station itself. The concentration of power in the hands of dominant factions often comes at the expense of smaller groups and individuals, further marginalizing those who are already struggling to survive. This deepening divide fuels resentment and rebellion, creating a cycle of oppression and resistance that perpetuates instability. For the inhabitants of the upper levels, these events serve as a stark reminder of the fragility of their own positions, leading to an atmosphere of fear and paranoia. As trust between different strata of the station's population erodes, cooperation becomes increasingly difficult, and the station's overall efficiency suffers. The influence of external actors also grows in the wake of these events. Rogue traders, mercenaries, and Xenos opportunists are quick to exploit the chaos in the underdecks, offering their services or seeking to profit from the situation. These external players often introduce new technologies, ideologies, or weapons into the mix, further destabilizing the already volatile environment. The presence of these outsiders complicates the Imperium's efforts to reassert control, as they often operate outside the reach of official authority and have little regard for the long-term consequences of their actions. On a broader scale, the events in the underdecks serve as a microcosm of the Imperium's larger struggles. The neglect and exploitation that characterize life in these regions are not unique to space stations, but are symptomatic of systemic issues that permeate the entire Imperium. As news of the chaos spreads, it fuels discontent on other stations and planets where similar conditions prevail. This growing awareness can lead to widespread unrest as oppressed populations begin to see their own struggles reflected in the events unfolding elsewhere. For the Imperium, this represents a significant threat, as maintaining order across its vast territories requires a delicate balance of fear, faith, and control. Militarily, the instability in the underdecks has both direct and indirect consequences. On a local level, the station's defenses are often compromised as resources are diverted to address internal conflicts. This leaves the station vulnerable to external threats, such as pirate raids or enemy incursions. On a broader scale, the disruptions in supply chains and logistics can weaken the Imperium's ability to wage war, as critical resources fail to reach the front lines. The events in the underdecks highlight the vulnerability of the Imperium's infrastructure, providing its enemies with valuable insights into how to exploit these weaknesses. Perhaps the most insidious consequence is the spread of heretical or subversive ideas. In the chaos of the underdecks, forbidden cults and ideologies often gain traction, offering desperate inhabitants an alternative to the Imperium's oppressive doctrines. These movements can quickly spread beyond the station, carried by traders, refugees, or rogue psychers, infecting other regions with dissent and rebellion. For the Imperium, the fight to contain these ideas is as critical as any military campaign, as the spread of heresy threatens the very foundations of its power. In the immediate aftermath of these events, the poorest regions of the station are left scarred, both physically and socially. The infrastructure, already in disrepair, suffers further damage, while the population is depleted by violence, starvation, and disease. Those who survive are often left traumatized, their lives shaped by the chaos they endured. Yet, amidst the destruction, small sparks of resilience and ingenuity emerge as the inhabitants adapt to their new reality and find ways to rebuild. These moments of hope, though fleeting, serve as a reminder of the enduring spirit of humanity, even in the darkest corners of the galaxy. The poorest regions of space stations, often referred to in hushed tones as the underdecks or the void levels, are rife with unique phenomena, technologies, and cultural dynamics that make them a subject of fascination and speculation among those who study or inhabit these forgotten depths. These aspects not only distinguish these regions from the rest of the station, but also highlight the resilience and ingenuity of their inhabitants in navigating such harsh and unforgiving environments. One of the most striking features of the poorest regions is the presence of scavenged and repurposed technologies. While much of the Imperium relies on standardized equipment dictated by the Mechanicus, the underdecks often operate outside these rigid confines. This results in an eclectic mix of machinery and tools, cobbled together from remnants of ancient devices, discarded station components, and even Xenos artifacts. The ingenuity required to keep these systems functional is extraordinary, as the inhabitants must rely on their knowledge of outdated or forbidden tech to maintain life support systems, power grids, and even weapons. These improvised technologies are not only practical, but often take on symbolic significance, representing the defiance of those who refuse to be crushed by the station's neglect. Among these improvised systems are air and water filtration networks that have been re-engineered multiple times over countless generations. In some areas, these systems have developed unique quirks, such as the ability to recycle materials far more efficiently than standard Imperium technology, or the incorporation of organic components, such as algae farms, to supplement oxygen production. These advancements are often viewed with suspicion by the Mechanicus, but their effectiveness cannot be denied, as they are vital to the survival of millions who would otherwise perish. The social and cultural structures in the poorest regions are equally fascinating. With traditional imperial hierarchies largely absent or ineffective, alternative systems of governance and community emerge. One such phenomenon is the concept of barter clans, groups bound together by mutual reliance on trade and resource exchange rather than traditional power dynamics. These clans form intricate networks where skills, tools, and information become the currency of survival. The rules governing these exchanges are deeply ingrained, often passed down orally through generations, and are enforced by unwritten codes of honor rather than brute force. Another unique aspect is the prevalence of superstition and folklore that permeates every aspect of life in the underdecks. These tales often center around the mysterious and dangerous entities believed to dwell in the farthest, most desolate reaches of the station. Stories of shadowy figures, spectral apparitions, or cursed machinery serve both as warnings and as a means of preserving cultural identity in an otherwise bleak existence. These beliefs are not dismissed lightly, as the environment of the underdecks lends itself to inexplicable occurrences, such as the sudden disappearance of entire communities or strange anomalies in power systems that defy logical explanation. A particularly debated phenomenon is the existence of hidden sanctuaries or ghost sectors within the station. These areas, often rumored but rarely confirmed, are said to be entirely cut off from the rest of the station, their inhabitants surviving in complete isolation. Some claim these sectors are relics of ancient construction projects abandoned long ago, while others suggest they were deliberately hidden by rogue elements seeking refuge from the Imperium's gaze. Regardless of their origin, ghost sectors are often romanticized as places of ultimate freedom or feared as havens for dark and forbidden practices. The role of psykers in the poorest regions is another topic that sparks endless debate among those familiar with these environments. While psykers are generally rare and heavily monitored by the Imperium, the underdecks are often beyond the reach of such oversight. This allows unregistered psykers to emerge, their abilities either feared or revered by the local populace. Some become leaders or healers, using their powers to protect their communities, while others fall to madness or corruption, becoming dangers not only to themselves, but to everyone around them. The presence of these individuals adds a volatile element to the already precarious balance of life in these regions. Another intriguing aspect is the use of forgotten or forbidden languages. The isolation of the underdecks has led to the development of unique dialects or entirely new languages, blending fragments of Low Gothic, ancient tongues, and even Xeno's languages into forms of communication incomprehensible to outsiders. These languages serve not only as practical tools for survival, but also as markers of identity, helping to unify disparate groups against the oppressive forces above. The sheer scale and labyrinthine nature of these regions also foster a unique relationship with space itself. The boundaries between the station's interior and the void beyond are often dangerously thin, leading to a pervasive fear of breaches or exposure to the cold emptiness of space. At the same time, this proximity to the void creates opportunities for scavenging, as small groups venture into derelict sections or abandoned docking bays in search of valuable materials. These expeditions are perilous, as the risks of decompression, radiation, or encounters with hostile entities are ever present, but the rewards can mean the difference between survival and starvation. Finally, the poorest regions are often viewed as places of potential, both by their inhabitants and by those who seek to exploit them. Despite the grim conditions, These areas are home to untapped resources, whether in the form of raw materials, unique technologies, or the sheer human capital of a population willing to endure unimaginable hardships. For some, the underdecks represent a frontier where the rules of the Imperium can be bent or broken, offering glimpses of what humanity might achieve if freed from the constraints of dogma and hierarchy. These unique aspects make the poorest regions of space stations a subject of fascination and debate, showcasing the complexity and resilience of life at the very edges of survival. They serve as a stark reminder of the Imperium's failures, but also of humanity's unyielding determination to adapt and endure, even in the darkest corners of the galaxy. Among the labyrinthine corridors of the poorest regions of space stations, certain individuals rise above the chaos, shaping the lives and destinies of those around them. These figures are neither champions of the Imperium nor mere pawns of larger factions. Instead, they are products of their harsh environment, driven by necessity, ambition, or ideology. Their unique qualities, motivations, strengths, and flaws make them the focal points of power and influence in these forsaken depths. One such figure is a notorious traitor known only as the Masked Factor. Rarely seen without their distinctive face covering, the Masked Factor is a master manipulator who thrives on secrecy and misdirection. Their name is whispered in every corner of the underdecks as they control a vast network of black market trade. Unlike typical merchants, the Masked Factor deals not just in goods, but in information, knowing that knowledge often holds more power than material wealth. Their strength lies in their ability to exploit rivalries, foster alliances, and anticipate shifts in power before they happen. However, their obsession with maintaining anonymity creates vulnerabilities. Should their true identity be uncovered, their network could unravel in an instant. Another prominent personality is Leda Vors, a former Adeptus Mechanicus technomat who abandoned her post after being accused of heresy. Leda now serves as a self-styled technosage, revered by many in the underdecks for her unparalleled ability to repair and repurpose ancient machinery. Her knowledge of arcane systems is her greatest strength, enabling entire communities to survive by relying on her skills to keep air filtration units, energy grids, and water systems operational. However, her disdain for the Mechanicus and her unorthodox methods have made her enemies among those who see her as a threat to the Imperium's doctrine. Leda's personal weakness is her isolationist nature. While she works tirelessly to aid others, she trusts no one, leaving her vulnerable to betrayal or sabotage. The preacher known as Father Grimal is another figure of note. A towering presence with a voice that carries through the darkest halls, Grimal leads a growing congregation of desperate souls who seek solace in his fiery sermons. His faith is a curious blend of imperial creed and unorthodox interpretations that emphasize redemption through unity and sacrifice. Grimal's greatest strength is his charisma, which allows him to inspire devotion among even the most cynical inhabitants of the underdecks. Yet his growing influence has drawn the ire of both rival factions and the ecclesiarchy, which views his teachings as dangerously heretical. Grimal's unyielding nature can also be his downfall. His refusal to compromise or bend his beliefs often places him and his followers in perilous situations. In the shadows lurks another key figure, a deadly enforcer named Silas Krell. A former bounty hunter turned gang lieutenant, Krell is a force to be reckoned with, feared for his ruthlessness and tactical brilliance. Known for his cybernetic enhancements, which include a bionic arm capable of crushing steel, Krell is the kind of person who thrives on chaos. His strength lies in his ability to maintain discipline within his ranks, ensuring that his gang operates with the precision of a small army. However, Krell's reliance on violence as his primary tool often blinds him to more subtle threats, and his reputation for cruelty makes him a target for those who see him as a threat to their survival. Then there is Nia Vren, a charismatic revolutionary who dreams of uniting the fragmented factions of the underdecks to overthrow the station's rulers. Once a dock worker, Nia's life changed when she witnessed the systematic exploitation of her community by corrupt overseers. Her strength lies in her ability to rally disparate groups under a common cause, using her sharp intellect and eloquence to inspire hope in even the most downtrodden individuals. Nia is not without her flaws, however. Her idealism sometimes clouds her judgment, leading her to underestimate the ruthless nature of her enemies. Furthermore, her growing popularity makes her a target not only for the station's rulers, but also for rival factions that see her movement as a threat to their own power. Another enigmatic figure is Calor Hex, a rogue psyker who wields their powers with a mixture of precision and reckless abandon. Hex operates on the fringes of the underdecks, offering their abilities to the highest bidder, whether it be for healing the sick, defending a settlement, or eliminating a rival. Their psychic talents make them a formidable presence, capable of turning the tide of any conflict with terrifying efficiency. However, Hex's power comes at a price. The strain of using their abilities takes a toll on their mind, leaving them increasingly unstable and prone to bouts of paranoia. This unpredictability makes them both a valuable asset and a dangerous liability to those who dare to work with them. Finally, there is Old Mother Mirren, a matriarchal figure who presides over one of the largest barter clans in the underdecks. Despite her advanced age, Mirren commands respect through her sharp wit and vast knowledge of the station's history and hidden resources. Her strength lies in her ability to mediate disputes and broker alliances, ensuring that her clan remains a central player in the underdeck's power dynamics. However, her reliance on tradition and her unwillingness to adapt to changing circumstances leave her vulnerable to younger, more ambitious rivals who see her as an obstacle to their own rise. These individuals, each with their own motivations, strengths, and weaknesses, illustrate the diverse and unpredictable nature of life in the poorest regions of space stations. Their actions shape the fate of countless lives, serving as a testament to both the resilience and the fragility of those who inhabit these forgotten depths. Together, they represent the complex interplay of power, survival, and ambition that defines the struggle for control in the underdecks. The poorest regions of space stations are shrouded in mystery and speculation, with countless unresolved questions and theories surrounding their existence and the dynamics of power within them. These uncertainties not only fuel debates among imperial authorities and scholars, but also captivate the imaginations of those who live within or study the underdecks. The lack of comprehensive records, coupled with the chaotic and often inaccessible nature of these regions, leaves many aspects open to interpretation and conjecture. One of the most debated questions is whether these regions are intentionally neglected or simply victims of systemic decay. Some argue that the Imperium deliberately allows the underdecks to fall into ruin, using the desperation of their inhabitants as a form of control. According to this theory, the misery and scarcity in these regions serve as a grim reminder to the rest of the station's population of what awaits those who step out of line or fail to contribute to the Imperium's goals. Others believe the neglect is unintentional, a result of the Imperium's immense bureaucracy and its inability to manage its sprawling empire effectively. The truth remains unclear, as neither perspective fully accounts for the complexities of the situation. Another significant mystery is the origins and true purpose of certain sectors within the underdecks. Many areas appear to predate the rest of the station, constructed with technologies or architectural styles that are no longer understood. These ancient sectors often feature mechanisms or symbols that defy easy classification, leading to speculation that they may have been built during the dark age of technology or even by non-human civilizations. The presence of such areas raises unsettling questions about the station's history and whether its current inhabitants are merely custodians of a structure they cannot fully comprehend. The question of hidden agendas within the underdecks is another source of intrigue. Many believe that certain factions, both within and outside the station, manipulate events in these regions for their own benefit. Rogue traders, heretical cults, or even rival imperial institutions are often suspected of fostering instability to gain access to resources, recruit followers, or undermine their enemies. These theories are difficult to prove, as those who attempt to investigate often meet untimely ends or disappear without a trace. The idea that the chaos in the underdecks may be orchestrated adds a layer of paranoia to an already volatile environment. One particularly contentious theory involves the so-called ghost sectors, areas rumored to be entirely cut off from the rest of the station. These sectors are said to house communities that have survived in isolation for generations, developing their own cultures, languages, and ways of life. Some speculate that these ghost sectors may hold valuable resources or forbidden technologies, while others fear they could be havens for heresy or even Xenos influence. The lack of concrete evidence fuels endless debate, with each new sighting or encounter adding to the mystery. The role of artificial intelligence within the underdecks is another subject of speculation. While the use of artificial intelligence is strictly forbidden by the Imperium, rumors persist of ancient machines still operating in the depths of certain stations. These machines are said to exhibit behaviors far beyond the capabilities of standard servitors, leading to theories that they may be remnants of a time when humanity's relationship with technology was less constrained. The possibility that such entities could influence or even control aspects of life in the underdecks is both fascinating and deeply troubling to those who consider the implications. Another unresolved question concerns the apparent resilience of certain communities within the underdecks. Despite the harsh conditions, some groups not only survive but thrive, maintaining order and stability in ways that seem almost miraculous. Scholars and observers often wonder how these communities manage to endure where others fail. Some attribute their success to exceptional leadership or unique cultural practices, while others suspect external assistance or access to hidden resources. These cases remain rare and poorly understood, adding to the mystique of the underdecks. One of the most chilling mysteries involves the phenomenon of mass disappearances. Entire communities have been known to vanish overnight, leaving behind no trace of what happened to them. Theories range from predation by warp-based entities to large-scale abductions by shadowy organizations. Some believe that these disappearances are the result of experiments conducted by the Adeptus Mechanicus or other Imperial factions, while others suggest they may be linked to forbidden rituals or breaches in reality. Whatever the cause, the fear of vanishing without explanation haunts many who live in the underdecks. The question of leadership and governance in these regions is also a subject of debate. While certain factions claim authority over specific areas, it is unclear whether any individual or group truly controls the underdecks in their entirety. Some theorists suggest that there may be unseen rulers who operate from the shadows, their influence extending across multiple stations and systems. Others argue that the very nature of the underdecks, fragmented, chaotic, and ever-changing, makes true governance impossible. This lack of clarity ensures that speculation about who, if anyone, holds ultimate power remains a topic of endless fascination. Finally, there is the unsettling possibility that the underdecks may harbor phenomena that defy the laws of nature and reality. Strange lights, inexplicable sounds, and sightings of shadowy figures are frequently reported by those who venture into the deepest and most desolate areas. While such accounts are often dismissed as the result of superstition or hallucination, the consistency of these reports across different stations raises the question of whether something more sinister is at work. The inability to investigate these occurrences further only deepens the mystery, leaving those who hear such tales to wonder about the true nature of the depths. These unresolved questions and theories serve as a testament to the enigmatic and often disturbing nature of the poorest regions of space stations. They highlight the vast gaps in understanding that persist even within the Imperium's seemingly all-encompassing grasp, offering glimpses of a reality that is as complex as it is terrifying. The search for answers continues, driven by equal parts curiosity and fear, as humanity struggles to comprehend the forces that shape its existence in the stars. The long-term consequences of the power dynamics and conditions in the poorest regions of space stations ripple far beyond the confines of the underdecks. Over decades, centuries, or even millennia, these regions will continue to influence the broader mechanisms of the Imperium and the galaxy itself. Whether these impacts lead to positive or negative outcomes depends on countless factors, but the potential for significant and lasting change is undeniable. One of the most likely outcomes is the gradual evolution of the social structure within these regions. The persistent neglect and exploitation of the underdecks could eventually lead to a more organized and unified resistance. Over time, disparate factions may find common ground in their shared struggles, leading to the formation of larger coalitions or movements. Such unity, while rare in the fragmented underdecks, could present a significant challenge to the Imperium's governance. If these movements succeed in asserting themselves, they might demand representation, resources, or autonomy, potentially reshaping the balance of power within the station and setting a precedent for other marginalized communities across the galaxy. On the other hand, the continuation of current conditions could result in a slow but inevitable collapse of these regions. As infrastructure decays further and resources become even scarcer, the poorest areas may become entirely uninhabitable. This could lead to the displacement of millions, overwhelming other sectors of the station or nearby systems. The migration of such populations would strain already limited resources and exacerbate existing tensions, potentially sparking conflicts that spread far beyond the station. These cascading failures would not only weaken individual stations, but could also destabilize entire sectors of the Imperium. Technological stagnation and innovation are two opposing forces that could shape the future of these regions. On one hand, the lack of access to reliable technology and the degradation of existing systems might lead to a complete breakdown of functionality in the poorest areas. This would plunge the inhabitants into even more primitive conditions, making recovery nearly impossible. On the other hand, the necessity to survive under such extreme circumstances could foster remarkable technological ingenuity. The underdecks have long been a breeding ground for unconventional engineering, and over time, this resourcefulness could result in breakthroughs that benefit not only the poorest regions, but potentially the entire Imperium. However, such advancements might remain inaccessible to the upper echelons of Imperial society if the underdeck's isolation persists. A more insidious long-term consequence is the potential for ideological and cultural shifts that diverge from the Imperium's doctrine. Over generations, the underdeck's isolation and self-reliance may lead to the development of entirely new belief systems, some of which could be viewed as heretical. These ideologies might spread through trade, refugees, or covert networks, undermining the unity and control that the Imperium relies upon. While some of these cultural evolutions could be harmless or even beneficial, others might pose significant threats, particularly if they foster rebellion or attract the attention of malevolent forces from beyond the warp. Economically, the prolonged instability in the underdecks has the potential to disrupt key supply chains and industrial outputs on a galactic scale. Many of the goods and materials produced in these regions are critical to the Imperium's war efforts, and the continued decline of these areas could weaken its ability to sustain prolonged campaigns. Over time, this could force the Imperium to rethink its approach to resource management and labor exploitation, potentially leading to reforms. However, the likelihood of such changes depends on whether the Imperium can recognize and address the root causes of these issues, rather than merely reacting to their symptoms. Politically, the power dynamics within the underdecks may influence the broader strategies of the Imperium. Factions that rise to prominence in these regions could eventually gain enough influence to play a role in station-wide or even sector-wide politics. This would be a dramatic shift, as the underdecks have historically been excluded from such arenas. If these factions are able to negotiate from positions of strength, they could force the Imperium to make concessions or risk open rebellion. Conversely, if the Imperium doubles down on its efforts to suppress these factions, the resulting conflicts could drain resources and manpower from other critical areas. In the far future, the cultural identity of the underdecks may become a symbol of resilience and defiance across the galaxy. The stories and traditions that emerge from these regions, shaped by hardship and survival, could inspire other oppressed populations to challenge the status quo. This would create a ripple effect, potentially leading to widespread unrest or even revolution in areas where imperial control is weakest. While such movements would be seen as a threat by the Imperium, they could also serve as a catalyst for change, forcing the Empire to adapt or risk fracturing under its own weight. The impact on the warp and its denizens is another long-term consequence worth considering. The despair, fear, and desperation that permeate the underdecks create fertile ground for the influence of the Imperium. Over time, these emotions could attract the attention of entities that thrive on such energies, leading to increased warp activity in and around the station. This would not only endanger the inhabitants of the underdecks, but also pose a threat to the station as a whole, as breaches between reality and the Imperium grow more frequent and unstable. Ultimately, the future of the poorest regions of space stations remains uncertain. They could become bastions of innovation and resilience, demonstrating humanity's ability to adapt and thrive even in the harshest conditions. Alternatively, they could serve as grim reminders of the Imperium's failures, their collapse hastening the decline of the Empire itself. Whether the outcome is one of hope or despair depends on countless variables, from the actions of individual leaders to the decisions of the Imperium's highest authorities. In either case, the significance of these regions cannot be underestimated, as their fate will inevitably shape the course of humanity's future among the stars.